the air inside the climate-controlled storage vault always smelled faintly of unbleached cotton and specialized preservation chemicals. I walked down the narrow, sterile corridor and unlocked Unit 404. I am a professional textile authenticator for a global auction house. Over the last 12 years, I had curated a highly specific, extremely valuable collection of vintage haute couture. These were not old clothes. They were documented cultural artifacts. I flipped the heavy industrial light switch. The fluorescent bulbs flickered to life. A cold, methodical gravity anchored my feet to the floor. The heavy, acid-free canvas garment bags were supposed to be perfectly aligned on the custom brass racks. Instead, there was a glaring, undeniable gap in the center of the row. I walked forward. My pulse remained steady, but my breathing slowed to a deliberate, measured rhythm. I pulled back the zipper of the remaining bags. 4 items were missing. A 1982 silk evening gown, a beaded jacket from a highly documented runway collection, and 2 extremely rare velvet cloaks. The combined auction value of those 4 pieces sat comfortably around $200,000. I did not call the police. I did not assume a random thief broke into a fortress. True betrayal is rarely a random act of violence. It usually comes from someone who already has the keys. I walked over to the digital control panel mounted near the door. The vault utilized a secure RFID tracking system. Every time the electronic lock was engaged, it recorded the user profile. I pulled up the access history for the previous 48 hours. The screen displayed a successful entry logged at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. The user profile belonged to my husband, Elias. Elias was a man who coasted through life on a wave of unearned privilege and charming apologies. He constantly started expensive new hobbies and abandoned them a month later. He resented my quiet, disciplined career. He always viewed my collection as a foolish obsession, completely failing to understand the financial weight hanging on those brass racks. I locked the vault. I drove back to our townhouse. The city traffic moved in a blur around me. Elias was sitting at the kitchen island drinking an expensive imported beer. He looked completely relaxed. He asked me how my day at the gallery went. I gave him a polite, practiced smile. I told him it was tedious. He offered to make dinner. He played the role of the devoted partner flawlessly. I walked upstairs to my home office. I opened my encrypted laptop. I needed to understand where the garments went. Elias had no connections in the underground art world. He only knew one person with a desperate, pathetic hunger for high fashion: his younger sister, Vanessa. Vanessa lived in a perpetual state of aesthetic envy. She followed hundreds of luxury influencers, constantly trying to mimic their wealth on a barista's salary. For the past 6 months, she had been relentlessly talking about launching an exclusive, appointment-only vintage boutique downtown. She claimed she had secured a secret investor. I opened her social media profile. The confirmation was instantaneous. Vanessa had just posted a heavily edited promotional video for her new storefront, the Heritage Collective. The video featured panning shots of minimalist white walls and custom display mannequins. Sitting right in the center of the room, draped over a cheap fiberglass torso, was my 1982 silk evening gown. The caption read, "Procured some incredible museum-grade pieces for the grand opening this Friday. Exclusive buyers only." Elias did not just steal from me. He handed my life's work to his entitled sister so she could play dress-up and pretend to be a successful entrepreneur. He planned to wait a few weeks, ask me to fetch something from the vault, and then feign absolute shock when we discovered the missing items. He would suggest we file a generic police report, knowing full well local authorities rarely recover stolen textiles. A generic confrontation would be a waste of oxygen. Elias would lie. Vanessa would claim I gifted the items to her. They would move the garments to a secondary location before I could secure a lawyer. I needed an inescapable, corporate execution. My collection was not insured through a standard home policy. It was fully underwritten by the Kensington Syndicate, an elite corporate entity based in London that specializes in fine art and antiquities. The stipulations of the policy were incredibly rigid. The garments were legally classified as secured assets. Removing them from the climate-controlled facility without prior authorization from the underwriters constituted high-value insurance fraud. I compiled a pristine, irrefutable digital dossier. I exported the RFID access logs proving Elias used his emergency passcode. I downloaded Vanessa's promotional videos in high definition. I attached the original certificates of authenticity in the Kensington appraisal documents. I bypassed the standard customer service portal. I sent the encrypted file directly to the lead investigator of the Kensington Fraud and Recovery Division. The response was immediate. The underwriter did not view this as a marital dispute. They viewed it as a blatant, insulting theft of their secured collateral. The investigator called me on a secure line. His voice was completely devoid of emotion. He offered to deploy a recovery team immediately to secure the assets. Told him to wait. I explained that Vanessa was hosting a highly publicized grand opening on Friday evening. She had invited prominent local fashion critics, wealthy socialites, and dozens of influential buyers. If the syndicate wanted to ensure the assets were completely stationary and ready for recovery, Friday night was the perfect window. The investigator agreed. The paperwork was drafted. The trap was locked. The week dragged on. Elias was in a fantastic mood. He whistled while he made coffee. He bought me flowers. He was intoxicated by the thrill of his own perceived cleverness. On Friday afternoon, he put on a tailored suit. He told me he was attending a mandatory networking event for his firm. I knew he was going to Vanessa's boutique. I told him I had a headache and planned to read a book in the bathtub. I kissed his cheek. It felt like kissing a stranger. As soon as his car left the driveway, I changed into a simple, dark trench coat. I drove downtown. The Heritage Collective was located in a trendy, expensive arts district. The storefront featured massive glass windows. I parked my car 2 blocks away and walked down the bustling pavement. I stopped across the street, blending perfectly into the evening crowd of tourists and diners. The boutique was brightly lit. The interior was packed with wealthy attendees holding delicate glasses of champagne. Vanessa wore a designer dress she definitely could not afford. She was holding court in the center of the room, laughing loudly, pointing at my vintage silk gown with a smug, arrogant expression. Elias stood near the register, looking incredibly proud of his sister. They were standing at the absolute peak of their fabricated mountain. At exactly 8 p.m., a sleek, unmarked black transit van pulled up to the curb directly in front of the boutique. 4 individuals stepped out. They did not look like police officers. They wore tailored business suits and carried thick, rigid document folders. They were flanked by 2 uniformed private security contractors. This was the Kensington Recovery Team. The lead investigator pushed open the glass doors of the boutique. The ambient chatter of the party immediately died. The affluent guests turned around, sensing the heavy, authoritative shift in the room. Vanessa's smile faltered. She walked toward the investigator, her heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. "Excuse me, this is a private, invite-only event. We are not open to the general public tonight." The investigator did not extend a greeting. He held up a thick legal document bearing the watermark of the Kensington Syndicate. "Vanessa Sterling," he announced. His voice was calm, projecting perfectly across the silent room. "We are executing a corporate repossession order for stolen insured antiquities." Vanessa physically recoiled. The color drained from her face, leaving her complexion dull and ashen. "What are you talking about? I procured everything in this room from private estates." The investigator stepped past her. He walked directly to the display mannequin holding my 1982 gown. "You are currently in possession of 4 registered museum-grade textiles," he stated firmly. They were removed from a secured vault without underwriter authorization. This constitutes felony insurance fraud and cross-state commerce theft. The wealthy guests began to whisper. Several people placed their champagne glasses on nearby tables and slowly backed toward the walls. The glamorous illusion of the boutique evaporated instantly. Elias pushed his way through the crowd. He looked terrified. "Hey, wait a minute," he stammered, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "There is a misunderstanding. My wife owns these pieces. I am her husband. I had permission to move them for a family showcase." The investigator turned his gaze to Elias. "We reviewed the RFID access logs, Mr. Sterling. We also hold a sworn, legally binding affidavit from the policyholder confirming no such permission was granted. You broke into a secured facility." Elias stopped breathing. The reality of his situation crashed down on his shoulders. He realized I knew. He realized I had known all week, and I had simply watched him dig his own grave. Vanessa let out a frantic, breathless gasp. She grabbed Elias by the arm. "You told me she gave them to you. You said she didn't want them anymore." She threw her own brother to the wolves in front of the city's elite. The investigator ignored their bickering. He signaled to the private security contractors. They did not gently handle the clothes. They pulled specialized, opaque evidence bags from their pockets. They unzipped the dresses directly off the mannequins. "You cannot take those!" Vanessa shrieked. Her voice cracked, echoing terribly in the minimalist space. "My investors are here. You are ruining my business." "You do not have a business, ma'am," the investigator replied coldly. "You operate a fencing location for stolen goods. Our legal department is currently filing a civil suit against this LLC for reputational damage to the syndicate. Furthermore, all documentation has been forwarded to the local district attorney for criminal processing." The socialites and fashion critics did not stay to watch the rest. They practically sprinted out the front doors, desperate to avoid being associated with a federal fraud investigation. They abandoned their drinks. They abandoned Vanessa. Elias stood frozen near the empty display racks. He looked like a hollow shell. His career, his marriage, and his freedom were dismantled in less than 5 minutes. Vanessa collapsed onto a velvet bench, hiding her face in her hands, sobbing loudly as the recovery team methodically bagged up the stolen cloaks. I stood across the street, watching the scene unfold through the expansive glass windows. I did not cross the road to deliver a triumphant speech. I did not need to see the tears streaming down his face. The truth is the most efficient architect of ruin. You do not need to raise your voice when the evidence speaks for itself. I turned toward the exit, stepped onto the busy pavement, and melted into the evening crowd, letting the heavy doors close on their ruined ambitions.